Well, hello everybody and welcome. You have tuned in to episode 418 of the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet. This is Linux in the Ham Shack. It's our deep dive episode, and tonight we have an interview with three of the major participants in the ARDC, or Amateur Radio Digital Communications. And we'll introduce them here really shortly and get into what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, I will introduce the quasi-absent Bill, NE4RD, who is somewhere in the wilds of South Dakota trying to find Wi-Fi. I'm Russ, K5TUX.
I'm Cheryl, W5MOO.
And normally Bill's dulcet tones would come in there, but we'll just have to do without him for today, unless he finds some Wi-Fi. Apparently, there's just not a lot of great propagation or a Denny's close by wherever he's at. So anyway, let's go ahead and move in and talk about the ARDC, and we'll introduce the folks who are with us tonight. The first person we have is the executive director of ARDC. She is Rosie Wolf, Kilo 7 Juliet Romeo Yankee Victor. Good evening.
Hello and good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Rosie Wolf, and I come to ARDC. I've been with ARDC for about a year now, which is kind of amazing. It's gone by very quickly. I come from a background in nonprofit management, curriculum development, a lot of work in the open source world, some work in like open source mapping and that kind of thing. And I was a few years ago, right when ARDC got our grant, our endowment for grant making, our founder, Brian Cantor, passed away, and one of the board members tapped me to help out the organization in a moment of need. So I accepted. So I'm here and helping ARDC to get started, get a lot of its administrative foundations laid, starting in no small part by hiring some really amazing people, including John Hayes and Dan Romanchik, who are both on this call.
All right, fantastic. We'll get more into that as we go along, I'm sure, but let's go ahead and bring in the other guys here. We have John Hayes, Kilo 7 Victor Echo, who is the chair of Grants Advisory Committee, the GAC. We like to pronounce our acronyms here because it's silly. And John was actually on the show talking about, I believe it was Western Digital Radio or something like that, way back in 2012. But welcome back to the show, John. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back. And, this real quick comeback is really valuable to me and important. Just my background, I've been associated with the AMPRNet basically from the beginning. I was the address coordinator in several areas around the country as I moved around a little bit, and for the last 13 or 14 years I've been doing that here in the Western Washington area. Brian approached me shortly before his passing to come on and head up the grants committee, and then we unfortunately lost him, and it was a few months later that we reconstituted it about the time Rosie came on board, and I've been leading that group since then as the chair. And my background is I'm a longtime software guy, open source, Linux, but I'm also ambidextrous and use proprietary systems as well. Was a senior executive in IT for the last 15 years or more, and now I'm living near the Puget Sound in Western Washington and devoting much of my time as a volunteer for the ARDC, and really looking forward to some exciting things going on. We've given a lot of money away in the form of grants, and we're planning to continue to do that for many years.
All right, fantastic. Thanks for the update there. And I said Western Digital Radio. It was Northwest Digital Radio, and I don't know if you're still affiliated with that group or not, but that was some years ago. And finally, we have the content manager apparently recently acquired content manager for what we understand for ARDC is Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, whom you might know for another reason. So, tell us about the ARDC and your involvement, and also the other thing that you do that other people might know your call sign for.
Yeah, so people might know me from my blog and or my study guides. And I've just recently joined the ARDC because it's just a really exciting group.
All right, very cool. Short and sweet, which is what we don't like here. We want verbose.
Well, sorry about that.
You got to take up some time, so it sounds like we're doing something here.
Well, I don't like to brag about myself too much.
All right, fair enough.
But you're so good. You totally should brag about yourself. Come on.
Well, thanks, but
Dan is the reason why I actually got my license twice.
yeah, I was just going to say that Cheryl is one of my readers and one of my success stories.
Yes, there you go.
See, it's all one big happy family here. But tonight we're going to talk about the ARDC, Amateur Radio Digital Communications. And so I guess, Rosie, you're the executive director. So you're like right at the top of the heap in this organization. So I imagine you'll probably be doing a fair share of the talking. If there's anything or any part of this interview that you want to delegate to, the other gentlemen who are here, we'll just go ahead and let you do that. But I'm going to sort of address you, when it comes to the major topics. And the first one we have is, so just tell us a little bit about what the ARDC is and what its mission is, and then we'll kind of go on from there.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, and good call on the delegation part. I'm happy for both John and Dan to speak to certain things. One thing that I should be pretty upfront about is that, when it comes to technical things, I'm a pretty slow learner. And so, I have my amateur radio license, obviously. But, I definitely rely on those two and a lot of other folks at ARDC to sort of like help explain things when they're a little bit above my pay grade. So, Amateur Radio Digital Communications is a nonprofit. As of this year, we became a private foundation. It got started, I believe, back in 2012 to be a sort of like nonprofit house for the 44net address space. And for many years, it's going to take me a minute to get used to murmurs this audio platform's messages in the sidebar. Sorry about that. So, for a while it was formed as a nonprofit to just sort of like manage the allocation of the 44net address space, which was, primarily allocated to amateur radio usage, amateur radio packet usage, or as some people say, to, connect amateur radio with the internet community. And for many years, that's basically all that it did. And back in 2019, the board of directors decided to, sell a quarter of the address space, and that became basically the equivalent of an endowment. And that endowment is used to, further the mission of everything related to amateur radio and digital communications. So what ARDC does is we really, I will say the first couple of years have really been very experimental, and we are like sort of like refining our operation and our direction as we go, and as we learn more and more about what are some of the biggest needs in amateur radio and digital communications. But yeah, what we do is we make grants in those areas. So, in the past, 2 years, we have given away in excess of about, $6 million, some of which went to, helping the radome at MIT be restored after it was slated for removal because the building that it was on was going to be restored, and there wasn't quite budget to help maintain that piece of equipment. So we've done stuff like that. We've funded educational projects like the Julia Robinson Mathematics Festival, which is now putting together a series of mathematics, like, what are they called? Mathematics, like games, basically, that are all related to digital communications. So, the kids can learn about things like, how radio waves work and, the math associated with that kind of thing. And then last, but of course, but certainly not least, we fund things like, related to, we just put out this RFP specifically for amateur radio clubs. So, calling for amateur radio clubs to send us a proposal for a project that, might be able to send us a proposal for a project that, might help them to, do something that they've always wanted to do, but that they weren't able to do because, funding was something that was amiss. So, for example, we gave some funding to the Chippewa Valley Amateur Radio Club to purchase a trailer that they would use to basically put a bunch of emergency equipment in that they could use in the event of, a disaster, and that they could also bring to schools for like educational opportunities. So yeah, that's the primary thing that we do. And, you mentioned something about like Rosie sitting on top of a giant heap. And, I will say that I up until very recently, as we've like gained more staff, that's kind of felt like it was true. I think that we didn't quite, we had this idea of like, oh yeah, like, it'll be a very like simple thing to, do a lot of this grant making. But of course, a lot of the, the regulations and paperwork that's required is a lot. So anyway, glad that we have staff and very glad that we're able to use this fund to support this community. It feels really good.
All right. Very good. So I guess my next question would be, do you fund amateur radio podcasts?
I mean, it's not outside of our mission. I mean, I think that, the answer is yeah. Ultimately, what we've been working on over the past year or so has been creating the administrative framework to give beyond 501c3s. And, some of that is still in the works. We recently, just as of this year, made our first international grant to the Deutsche Amateur Radio Club in Germany. So, our interest is really to be able to give to as many different types of organizations within the area of amateur radio and digital communications, and podcasts certainly fall into it. I mean, you make our life a whole lot easier and give yourself a whole lot less paperwork if you have a 501c3 to be your fiscal sponsor and run the project through. But yeah, we are definitely working on giving to all types of organizations. So yeah. And podcasts are great, actually. Like, y'all have such an important role within this community. Like, getting the word out about what we do is like super important. And I'm wondering, Dan or John might actually have some things to say about that too. Maybe thinking John, since he's the head of the Grants Advisory Committee.
Sure. As Rosie said, there's a lot of different things that we do grants for, and certainly podcasts, with the caveat that, as she mentioned, right now we primarily are looking for organizations that fall into 501c3 or equivalent, for us to send the money to, and then they can disperse it to the recipient in a orderly fashion. So we're not involved in the day-to-day operation of that. Some of the other key things that we've been doing with our grant making is we've been funding as an accelerator for scholarships for the ARRL and for the Foundation for Amateur Radio. And I think last year we gave something like $400,000 between the two. And again, are doing, I guess this year, $400,000, last year, slightly less than that. But that has allowed much more generous scholarships to be offered. And additional scholarships to be offered. Basically, at least in one case, we doubled the budget they had for scholarships, and I foresee us continuing to do that. We're also funding a number of software development projects, including the M17 project through a fiscal sponsor. We've got some money going into various space and satellite kinds of things, doing some next generation kind of satellite equipment development. We've also helped, we're also very interested in underrepresented and digital divide type things, and we've helped a couple of indigenous communities get some internet, which really helped out with the pandemic in place, so that kids could go to school and some people could get work done from home. So we're always looking for those kinds of things to do. We've got a project going with the IEEE that's focused on getting young people, and particularly a good percentage of those being female, licensed and set up, and get them a good foot under them. We're working with the Open Web RX project. We've done a couple of tower replacements, so some internet to repeater sites. We've got a project that we've approved for the state of Oregon to build a microwave backbone network there using HAMWAN combined with AREDN and some other technologies to further the reach into the ham community in Oregon. They did an excellent job of putting together a very clear plan of what they wanted to do, and so we were happy to fund that. So yeah, we got a whole variety of things that we're working on in that area, and we're always looking for new and interesting things to come out. We have some guidance as to what we're looking for. People can start at the website ampr.org/giving, and then there's a couple of pages off of there to help a bit. We also have a grants manager who is more than happy to help people that are not familiar with writing grants to get their grant put together to put before the committee so that we can review it and hopefully fund it.
Thank you for giving me a long and serious answer to a ridiculous question.
It's not ridiculous, though. It's a totally valid thing.
Maybe one of these days I'll figure out how to write a grant proposal, and then we'll see what happens. Actually, I'm setting up. Well, I've already set up a club called the Open Source Amateur Radio Club.
Nice.
Already has a call sign and everything, and will probably be incorporated and maybe even 501c3 if I want to go through all that paperwork, which I know is hefty.
It's hefty, yeah, it is.
But that might be something I think about down the road, and
cool.
We'll see where that goes. But
awesome, we'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Well, we heard from Michelle of the ORI on a recent past episode, and how, from her perspective, how ARDC integrates with ORI. So maybe you could discuss your involvement with the ORI and what you guys are doing from your perspective.
Oh, sure. Well, the Open Research Institute is an amazing organization. It's, as Michelle probably alluded to on her not even alluded to, but probably spoke to on the podcast. I mean, it's one of the only, only organizations of its kind. So, we have a fairly close relationship with ORI. They are, we've given them a lot of grants, and they have been a really amazing fiscal sponsor for some incredible projects, including the M17 project that John mentioned. So they're great. Also, I have to give, Michelle a lot of credit because, ARDC and its grant making capabilities. I remember talking to somebody about this, and they're like, describing that, all organizations go through these different phases. Like so they start out and they're like a baby, and then they're a toddler, and they're like trying different things, and they get to be a kid, and, finally, grow up to one day be something like the MacArthur Foundation. And, I really appreciate Michelle and her perspective because, she has been, she knows some of our board members, and she's been, pretty closely aligned with us since our baby days. And so she's been really, with us as we grow. And so, I would say that we have as a funder to grantee relationship, we have a pretty close camaraderie, as much as you can have with, between two organizations. So yeah, they're pretty great. All
right. Very cool. So we've been talking a lot about, grants and funding and, the 44 network and all that kind of thing that ARDC is really involved in. But the group, your organization is called Amateur Radio Digital Communications, which makes it sound like there's actually sort of another focus. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, totally. And that's a great question and good observation. Good eye. Anyone who looks at our logo can probably see that there's, AR and then a line and then DC. And that is very on purpose. And that's basically because, amateur radio obviously is a really, key part of our mission and a part of our focus. And there's another part of it that kind of expands, a little bit beyond that. I would say that, to be totally honest, that part of our mission has not been as well defined. Ultimately, I think that what we are really interested in is technical innovation when it comes to anything related to digital communications or communications in general, right? If you go to our grant making page, you'll see that we have 3 primary areas that we fund. One being support and growth of amateur radio, the second one being education, and then the third one being technical innovation. And technical innovation falls into a few categories, and analog communications being one of them. So within the digital communication component, I think that I think one of the things that we're probably the most interested in are for example, mesh network protocols. How can we do those better? What does it take to really do a mesh network protocol or a mesh network that doesn't have any sort of stable nodes, which I think is the more common way that we see it happen today. But because that part really relates to more of the innovative side of things, I would say that it's got a lot of room to explore and to be imaginary, right? For example, I want to give you examples of potential fund projects that we could fund, but I would then be talking about our potential grantees, and I can't quite do that. John, do you have more that you want to say about the digital communication side of thing from your perspective?
Yeah, so when you combine the amateur radio and digital communications, there's a lot of things that fall into that space. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work with digital voice and digital networking. We have some unique, so there are some things that would be in digital communication that have high commercial value, and so you have big companies spending all kinds of money to put those together. There are other areas where we might have a need that they're not meeting. To give you an example, when we use the microwave bands to carry traffic for amateur radio, so much of the equipment and the protocols that are out there are going encrypted all over. And at least in the United States, we're not supposed to encrypt traffic to obscure the meaning of the message. And so there's opportunities, particularly with the open source community, to take a lot of programs and say, okay, we're going to do the same thing, and we might do encrypted authentication and authorization because you can do that under the regulations, but the content itself needs to be unencrypted. And so finding those types of projects that we can work on, not everything has to be amateur radio related, but we'd like to see some kind of a connection between the two on a lot of our grants. We're also doing some things in the open source space to make it more reliable, better documented, giving some projects an opportunity to go out there. One of the things that is really interesting about our organization is so many foundations that are out there have to expend a lot of energy on fundraising and some energy on doing grants. When it comes to that side of our house of giving grants, we just have to worry about doing the grants. Our endowment provides the funds we need to make those grants. And that puts a little different flavor on what we can do sometimes when we're talking to potential grantees. Give us what you really want to accomplish, and we'll see if we can fit it, which is kind of a different mindset from the way a lot of amateur radio organizations or open source organizations have worked in the past, which is to be as frugal as possible. And of course, we want to be fiscally responsible, but we want people to give us their aspirations and dreams and see where and if we can fit into those.
Yeah, and I think to add on to what John is saying is that, and everything he's saying is totally right on, is that one of the things that's really unique about us is that we're not afraid to fail, right? Like one of the things that happens with, in some organizations, like, if you don't do everything 100% correctly, you might risk getting some kind of future funding, right? And that's not really the case here. Like if you do an experiment and that experiment fails, but you learned something from it that would help you or somebody else to, maybe try that experiment again in a different way that produces a more successful result, like that's fine. So, we really want to encourage people to, to tinker and try and, and to give it their all. And then what we want to do is really just to be able to, to support that the best that we can.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. Whether you succeed or fail, we want that information to be available to others who are interested. So one of our principles in grant making is that the projects need to be open source, open documentation, so that people can learn from it. And shoot, if you tried something that people have been thinking about and you found a barrier, we'd like to know what that barrier is, share it with the community, and then they can go out and maybe try a little different angle at it and have success, and everyone benefits from that.
Totally.
So I kind of wanted to ask about, I'm trying to follow these notes that Bill put in here, and I'm probably doing a really bad job of it, but
not at all. You're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great.
Okay. Well, thanks for the pep talk.
No problem. So
I'm curious about AMPRNet. Is ARDC AMPRNet? Is it an offshoot of AMPRNet? Is it a subset of AMPRNet? Is it, where does that fit in? And does like the ARDC or AMPRNet, are they the same thing? Do they have services of their own other than this grant proposal stuff? Is there like part of the organization that people can use in some way, that doesn't involve funding and things like that? Maybe you could
sure.
Some kind of or answer out of that really
totally.
long.
No, I see where you're going. And, to be totally honest, it's a little bit confusing, right? Like, we're called Amateur Radio Digital Communications. We manage the AMPRNet. Our whole URL is AMPR.org. It's totally confusing and kills our SEO, which is, a whole other story. But basically, yeah, so ARDC got its start by basically managing the AMPRNet. The AMPRNet being primarily this address space that was allocated to amateur radio, to connect amateur radio to the internet. So at this stage, like we basically, our organization manages that space. And currently it's really exciting. We have a technical advisory committee. They are putting a ton of work into thinking about how we can, better make use of the space, better allocate it, et cetera. But yeah, so if you are somebody who wants to get an IP address and you want to use it primarily for, amateur packet radio, you can get that for free. You go to ampr.org, you go to our portal and you make a request, and, there are a series of regional coordinators and our main system administrator, Chris, G1FEF, who will help to allocate it. This is definitely one I think I want to give to John, because, he's been involved in the AMPRNet for longer than, I've even known about it.
Yeah, I'm the Methuselah here on AMPRNet. So I add one thing to what Rosie said there as far as getting addresses. The addresses don't have to be for traditional AX.25 packet radio. In fact, the largest concentrations of addresses right now are in Europe and specifically Germany. And they've built a microwave network that is using some of that address space for amateur radio type activities, whether it's linking repeaters or providing amateur radio services over So it kind of becomes the infrastructure for that. And our technical, and there are other areas here in the Western Washington, Seattle area where I am, and Portland where Rosie is, we have similar type of networks being built up. And there are a few in other parts of the country as well, also doing this approach. And one of the beautiful things about the address space we have is we own it outright as legacy. ARDC owns it, and we don't charge people for it. So if you need a dozen IP addresses, or a full 256 or something like that, we get it, and we don't charge you a lease fee or anything like that for it. And that's a very valuable asset for people that are building up applications, and we want to continue to do that. The tech committee is more internationally represented than the grants committee. We'd like them both to be internationally represented. We have some international members on the grants committee, but the tech committee has a good international representation. So we're seeing a lot of things coming out of that, and we're working on some documents and some technical direction kind of things that I think people are going to be really excited about once they're baked and we can share them with everybody.
Does that help to answer the question?
I think it answered the question just fine. Yes.
Excellent.
Speaking to that, though, so how did it come to be that amateur radio, quote unquote, wound up with a /8? I mean, it's unfathomable to think of even requesting something, an IPv4 block addresses so large at this point. But how was it that AMPRNet got that?
Well, it's that old thing. The first in folks kind of get an advantage. And Hank Magnuski, who serves on the grants committee now, was the one who made the contacts and got the allocation of the /8, as you say, 30 some odd years ago. And then we've just held on to that and managed it since then. And with ARDC, one of the problems we had was that you needed to have an owner of an address space, and it was passed down through a couple of individuals until it finally got to Brian Cantor. And Brian saw the wisdom of having that ownership transferred to a nonprofit organization in case the unimaginable happened and the person who was the quote owner of the address space was to pass away. And it was very fortuitous that he did that, because unfortunately that happened to him. And so we have an organization to carry it forward. But to your point, basically the /8 is because we were early, before people knew what the internet really was.
Right, before the value became apparent.
Right.
Just maybe one quick technical question for my own personal benefit. Like, a lot of address space is managed by certain organizations like ARIN and RIPE and so on like that. So is AMPRNet the group that does the allocation for 44? Is that how that works?
So Net 44, as we like to call it, is a legacy allocation that predates ARIN. And so we currently are independent, and we'll see what the future holds. But we're very definite about keeping that independence and control going from an operational point of view.
All right, very cool. And just as a totally irrelevant side note, my company actually has two /24s pre-ARIN that we also own. It's a much smaller address space, but they are ours.
Yeah, I personally have a /24, which I actually host to a data center, and then I VPN it out to where I need the addresses.
Oh, there you go. So I know some of the things about the allocation that was sold off you can talk about, and some things you can't. But my first question would be: was it a decision to set up this sort of grant organization to allow the funding? Was that the reason it was sold off, or was there some other motivating factor?
Yes, that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, easy peasy.
Yeah, totally.
And I know you can't talk about who and how much and all that, but it is now public information. I looked it up myself, so anybody who wants to know how that happened and how much it was worth, they can do it. It's all public information because you guys are a 501c3, so you have to publish all that information. We obviously won't talk about that now.
Appreciate that very, very, very much.
But the information is out there for anybody who wants to look it up.
Yeah, if you're really interested, you can find it, but
Yeah.
we're not at liberty to talk about the details.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely. So Bill has a list of grants here, I think, that you guys have given out in the organizations that they were for and kind of what they were for. And there are a lot of them. You are definitely supporting a lot of great organizations and great projects. I don't think we need to go through all of these, honestly. But that's actually literally down to the end of the note. So now is where we're going to have you guys fill in some blanks. So if there's something about the organization or the grant process or information you want to give out about AMPRNet and the address space or anything else that I didn't touch on, this is kind of the place to put it because I'm sort of out of questions.
Well, it's certainly not completely up to date, but anybody that wanted to go out and look at that list, it's at ampr.org/grants, and we show how much money we've given each of the grantees and try to provide a synopsis of what the grant was for.
Let me ask quickly about M17, because the grant you gave that project is, let's just say, significant. Is that because like you saw some extreme value, or the grant proposal had enough information in it that they sort of required that kind of funding, or what was the sort of basis behind that significant grant to that organization? Because I love M17, I love where it's going, I love what they're doing, and I'm actually using it. I have my own reflector and everything already, so I love the project. But why was ARDC so interested, I guess, in that particular one?
The M17 grant?
Yes.
They had a really well-written presentation on what they wanted to do and how much they needed to do it and what they would spend it on. And it was actually a pretty easy one for us to do. It fell into several of our granting categories that we'd want, and we were just tickled pink that they came to us and said, can you help us out a little bit?
Yeah, agree. And I think that actually speaks to something else that maybe is unique about us. But, in general, we want to, one, M17 had already done a lot of really great work that really spoke for itself, right? It wasn't like they were like, hey, we have this idea. We've never done anything like this before. Give us, $250,000, they had a track record that really spoke for itself. But, that aside, I think that one of the things that we really try to do is, if somebody says, hey, I need this number of dollars to do, X or Y project, if it's a good project, we're going to give you what you need, right? We don't want to just, give out more money than we need to. Like John says, we need to be fiscally responsible, but we understand that these things cost money. And, along those lines, I think that, and this is a place where I personally feel very passionate. And I think that, many in our board and our grants advisory committee agree. Open source is one of the, it's such an important part of our digital ecosystem. And, John has heard me talk about this a million times, but I love open source software. And sometimes I get so frustrated with using it because, it's buggy or, there's some piece of it that's just really difficult to use. And I also have so much compassion because I know that the reason behind that is because people are doing this in their off hours, in their spare time. There's not really a lot of investment that goes into supporting open source software. So, as much as it frustrates me, I have a lot of compassion. So, for us, like, if we're supporting open source software, like, we want to support open source software, right? Like, we're happy to help, support paying people to do this work, especially if they're quality people. So, in the case of M17, that was all just really clear. So it was, like John says, it was a no-brainer to give them what they asked for.
All right. We have had the folks from M17 on here and they've talked about their project, and I'm kind of guessing, I don't know if you can, I don't want to like dive into their grant proposal or anything like that, but
Sure.
I'm guessing that a lot of their grant focused on hardware, because I think that's what they're really trying to get up. They've worked with the DSPs and existing hardware taking off of like, the GD77 and OpenRTX and all that kind of stuff. And they've got a lot of the software side of it working, but I think hardware is where they're kind of focused. And that's probably why the grant proposal was so large, I guess, because they,
Yeah. So particularly if you're developing hardware, and the same is true for software, but particularly for hardware, the equipment to properly test it is not cheap. And if you want to do something quality, which the M17 folks want to do, there needs to be funds to fund that. Some guys have a pretty good lab at home. I know a guy lives near Rosie that can work on anything up to something like 36 gigahertz just with the lab equipment that he has in house, right? He's worked at a lot of places, and he hasn't put in a grant request, but he's a friend of mine, so I know what he's done there. He can do that just with the equipment he has. But a lot of folks, they have the smarts, and this friend of mine, he's worked for companies and been able to buy off of in-house surplus and stuff like that. They know what to do. They know how to run the equipment. They have all the skills that are necessary. But if they just had that piece of equipment, it'd help them. We have another one that's not on the list, I don't think yet, but we have granted it. It's some equipment to help. Oh, no, it is there. It's some locating equipment for RFI, particularly in the LA Basin area. They have some really big problems with the power company not following up on interference reports, so you have to provide them documentation. So we helped them. They bought some equipment themselves, and we helped them buy some additional equipment that will help them provide good documentation of what they're discovering. The power company has the legal responsibility to fix it, but they're not necessarily going out and getting the documentation they need themselves.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very good. I think Bill is here. Bill, are you actually here? Can you speak?
Yes, I'm finally here. It's crazy, but I'm enjoying the conversation.
All right. I tried to go down through the notes as you pushed them out there, and I don't know if I covered everything, but was there anything that you can think of in the notes that you had that I haven't touched on?
No, not so far as much as I've heard. It sounds like you've covered all the bases.
All right, good. I know Darren in the chat here had a question, but he was talking about mesh networks, and I'm not sure his question was related to what we're talking about, but I'm going to ask him to maybe rephrase or see if that question is still valid. And if it is, I will present it to all of you. But in the meantime, let's see, was there anything else about AMPRNet or ARDC or anything else that we haven't touched on? Or maybe you can tell everybody, I know we've touched on some of the places they can go, but at least maybe do a little clearinghouse of where they can find information about the various parts of ARDC, like what it does, where the FAQ might be, if there are like GitHub projects, maybe like I know you mentioned the grant link before, but just kind of wrap up all of that stuff where people can go find out all the information they need to about ARDC.
Yeah, we can totally do that. And actually, I realized that we haven't really heard from Dan. Dan, do you want to rattle off some URLs, Dan?
Remember to unmute, put the pants on, then
man. Hey, I'm wearing a skirt today. Every time you say that, they're like, "Who's not wearing pants?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not, but I am fully clothed." So, all right. Well, since I haven't heard from Dan, I'll go ahead and do it. So we have our main website is www.ampr.org. That's the main place to go, and I'm excited to say that we're in the process of redoing the website. So, hooray, hooray! If you want to find out about our grants, go to You can go to ampr.org/giving. And that gives you really some of the high level information about, our grant making categories, links to our awards, eligibility, all of that kind of stuff. If you want to just sort of like see, what's going on, and I can't wait to redo our blog. But news and updates is our blog. We post RFPs there. We have some, we actually need to do a blog post announcing that Dan has joined our team, which I'm super, super excited about. AMPR.org. If you go, actually, it's portal.ampr.org. For anyone who's interested in the AMPRNet or for getting IP address space, that's the place that you want to go. Ultimately, if you have any, questions about anything related to grants, send us an email to giving@ampr.org. Chelsea, our new grants manager, who is wonderful, will gladly help you with any questions that you have. So,
what about any social media, anything like that? Discord servers, IRC, anything like that? Or...
Not yet. Although this is if Dan actually is able to connect. Dan, I think, just set up our Twitter account, which is exciting. Dan.
Well, he unmuted. That's a start.
That's a start.
He wants to talk. I know. I can feel it. I can feel it.
Oh, man. Yeah, I don't think that the technology is being kind to him today. I'm so sorry. But yeah, no, so we don't have any social media presence yet, but that's actually one of the things I'm really excited for Dan to be working on, is for us to finally do that. So we'll primarily be on Twitter. Because we, are very much into open source. We probably won't be on Discord immediately. But nothing says we'll never be there. So
yeah, we do have a listserv where a lot of traffic goes by, and you can find out about that through our site. And I just really want people to know that we're really looking for them to reach out to us. We're trying to reach out to them as well. But we want to hear your ideas, and you don't have to have a fully baked grant. You can send us an email or contact us some other way and say, hey, here's an idea I have. Would it be worth writing a grant proposal? Or you could even go a step further. I've got the idea. I think it's grant worthy, but I need some help on how I put that together. And we're more than happy to, both Chelsea and Dan, help people put that text together to go in the grant request.
All right. That sounds great. I love what you guys are doing. I love how it came about. And, it's been I know it was a great windfall for the fact that the IPv4 space has become such a commodity that that it enabled your organization to be able to support all of these great projects. I mean, that's really a wonderful thing, and I'm glad you're partnering. Well, I don't know about partnering is the right word, but at least engaged with like the Open Research Institute and all the other places that are finding all of these great projects and getting them out there and getting them funded. And getting them what they need to do all these great things. So it's really cool. And unless you have anything else to wrap up, and unless Dan can say anything.
I just got a note from Dan. He says that his Mumble just decided to quit working and he's reloaded and everything, but but no dice. Oh,
that's so unfortunate. Maybe he needs to write a quick guide to Mumble.
Yeah. I think that, I think he's looking at all the guides right now and it's not working. So yeah, perhaps we'll add that to his ever lengthening list.
I would just add that as Rosie said, we've given away several $1 million so far, and we've got our endowment set up, so we'll have funds for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to run down the endowment, but it is sufficient that we can do a lot of good things. They don't all have to be $1.6 million radome saves.
But those are fun. Just saying.
Those are fun.
We like those.
We like those. But anything down to a few $1,000s to put together a satellite ISS contact station for a school. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can be done, and we'd love to help out with that.
Totally. Yeah.
So does being open source sort of tick an extra box for you guys, or does it really matter?
It's a qualification.
Yeah. At this time, it's a qualification. Yeah.
Okay. So not only does it tick a box, it's a requirement.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well,
totally.
that is even better. I like that.
Yeah. In fact, we've had to modify some grant requests or reject some grant requests because the presenter couldn't get to a open source position.
This is kind of an esoteric question, but do you care about the open source? Does it have to be copyleft open source, or does it just have to be open source? Because, if something is MIT licensed, it can wind up being closed sourced eventually.
Right. I would say that the definition that we often give is that we really prefer, is it open source initiative? We prefer the OSI licenses. So, that's where, those are the licenses that we really prefer. I don't think that we would necessarily reject something outright if it had a different type of license, but I think about this, the way I think about this is to, the way I put it is like, we need to be as open as possible, right? Like, we give away scholarships. I'm not going to require that every single scholarship recipient take every bit of their schoolwork and make it open source, right? So there's like some, as with all rules, there are like some limitations, but yeah, in general, I would say that we'd prefer an OSI license, or an OSI approved license. But if there's a different one that someone really needs to work with for some reason, then you can talk to us.
All right, cool. I like where that goes, actually.
Cool.
So I think we've gotten down through it. I think you threw out all the information when we said, is there anything else we need to talk about? So I don't know that there's anything else. I did not see any follow-up questions in the chat room. So I think everybody's kind of settled there.
Cool.
So that means I think we're kind of done.
Great. Cool. Well, this has been a real pleasure. And I really appreciate you helping us to spread the word because, not a whole lot of people know that we exist. I think that that's changing slowly but surely. But, the more people that know about us, the more people, we might be able to help.
Yep.
Well, and we're looking to hear about all the great projects you decide to give grants to and all the ones you want to tell us about when hopefully you'll come back on the show maybe in a year or two and tell us all the great things that ARDC is doing.
We'd love that.
And we would love to have you. So I don't think Dan can sort of sign off for himself because he's having mumblish. Oh, well, he's going to try.
Actually, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay! Yay!
Just in time.
Just in time to say goodbye.
And the irony is they hired me to do communications for them, right?
Right. I know, right?
But all I want to say is I just want to impart the idea of how exciting this thing really is. All these grants, all this stuff's cool. But I think Michelle hit it right when she said in one of the previous episodes, this could be a real game changer.
Mm-hmm.
And I that's why I joined ARDC, or sort of conned them into let me join them.
Oh, whatever. You volunteered, and then we were like, we must hire him. He must be one of us.
because that it's all about communication at this point. Mm-hmm. And like she said, thanks for letting us on the show, and certainly I'm sure we'll be glad to come back.
Well, thank you for being here. And in a weird bit of serendipity, now that you've come back, the echo is gone.
That is cruel. That is
Well,
super unfair.
You know what happened? I was fooling around with the controls, and I think that froze the microphone somehow. But I think I finally got the controls right.
All right. We'll see. So we're ready to come back next year. So
That's right.
don't change any settings on any of your machines.
I'm not going to touch it.
Okay, great.
And don't do a OS upgrade or anything in between.
Yep. Nope. None of that. We'll have none of it.
Wrap that computer in bubble wrap, and we'll pull it back out for the next.
Precisely.
That's okay. We'll be using a completely different software by the next time. So
No. Okay.
all right. So thanks, Dan, for coming on and finally getting in there at the end. That's fantastic. And thank you, John, K7VE, for being here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
I'm going to have to actually go back real quick and look up your call sign because you don't have an easy one. But thank you, Rosie KJ7RYV, for being here.
That's right.
So KJ7RYV, that sounds kind of recent.
It's very recent. Yeah. I mean, I was not a ham when I came into this job, but definitely wanted to become one. And I'm, I know that some people are like, oh man, I don't really like call sign. I love my call sign. It like reminds me of Rosie the Riveter. It's great. So, but yeah, I'm definitely a newbie and still learning every single day.
Yeah, but don't undersell that, Rosie, because you come from a family with other hams in it.
Totally. It's true. Yeah, that was actually one of the greatest things that has happened because of this is my grandpa is a ham. And, he was so excited when he found out that I was a ham, that I was doing this job. I went up to Vermont to go see him last year. I kind of was like, I kind of broke the quarantine rules, but I'm like, I'm going to see Grandpa. You can't stop me. I'll be 6 feet away from him. I don't care. But he ended up giving me his Morse tapper and his radio that he had pulled out of his boat. All of these, they're kind of out of date now, but like all of these old, ARRL books about satellites. It was great. So it's created this really wonderful connection with one of my favorite humans on the entire planet. So it's been a real treat.
And the radio he gave her is older but modern.
Yeah.
Now, are you from there? Are you a New Englander?
No, I'm from. I'm initially from Atlanta, Georgia, and I now live in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said he lives in Vermont, so I was going to go, oh yes, another New Englander. So.
No, I love Vermont though. No, my grandpa, my family has lived in Vermont for, close to 100 years. So yeah, I don't have my personal roots there, but my family has roots there for sure.
Oh, well, very good.
Yeah, it's cool.
All right. So I'm going to let Bill come on here real quick, since he's still here, and see if he has anything else before we go ahead and wrap this up.
No, I think I'm actually good. I feel like Dan somewhat. Technology has not been very kind to me this evening, so I'm glad everybody could make it, and I'm so happy we could have this conversation.
Yep, same.
Yep.
All right. Well, yes. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for talking to us about ARDC and all the great things you're doing. It was wonderful to talk to you, and I really hope you come back soon. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. This has been episode number 418 of Linux in the Ham Shack, our deep dive into amateur radio digital communications. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And thanks, everybody who was with us live in the chat tonight. We had Don, KC9ZMY, Ted, WA0EIR, Steve, K7HVT, Darren, VK6EK, Tony, K4XSS, and Fred, N2NRV. Really appreciate all you guys listening to us live and sort of keeping us entertained while we talk to our guests. And we hope you'll come back for the very next episode. We appreciate you all being here. I'm Russ, K5TUX.
I'm Cheryl, W5MOO.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD 73.